Hello, my name is Katie and welcome to my video. Today I'm here to do my November wrap-up. November was kind of a weird month for me. For the first 2 weeks I wasn't in the mood to read much of anything. I had a bunch of DNFs this month, which rarely happens to me. I don't know if it was like the seasons changing and I was getting cranky because it was getting cold, or if it was stress from school. Whatever it was, it's gonna be a strange wrap-up. To start with, let's just get some of the stats out of the way. In the month of November, I read 11 books for a total of 3,364 pages. This is not including the books I DNF'd, because I DNF'd them within like the first 50 pages or so. Yes, 11 books, 3,364 pages. Hopefully I have a little graph here showing you like the genres each of the books fits into or whatever. The breakdown for page per book was I had 7 that were less than 300 pages, which I think is because of the nonfiction that I was reading. A lot of it was on the shorter side. I had 3 that were between 300 and 499 pages, and I had 1 that was over 500 pages. I read 6 nonfiction and 5 fiction this month, which isn't bad. That's about double what I usually read for nonfiction in a month, though I will say a couple of them were pretty short. But still, I'm pleased with how that went. My average star rating for the month was 3.95, which isn't terrible, I don't think, but it's also not the best reading month I've ever had. I had 1 book that I didn't give a rating to. I had 0 1-star books, 1 2-star, 1 3-star, 3 4-star, 2 4.5 stars, and 2 5 stars this month, which not terrible, but also just kind of meh, I guess. Just an average month, especially when you factor in the DNFs I had. I guess we can start with the DNFs and get those knocked out of the way. I think what was most disappointing about the DNFs is that 2 of them were on my Nonfiction November TBR, which makes me a little bit sad, but that's okay. Not everything works for everybody. The first DNF was On Grand Strategy by John Lewis Gaddis. I think this just isn't my type of book. The first chapter was pretty interesting, and then I stopped caring. A lot of it had to do with like military strategy, and I just don't think that's really my interest. A lot of it was history, but I also felt like the chapters, like, he could have made his point within like a few paragraphs, yet I had to read like 4 pages of background information, and I just didn't care. It was so boring. I found myself dreading having to pick this back up again. So I just DNF'd it. I'm not sure yet if I'm gonna get rid of it. I probably will. I just don't see myself picking it up in the future. The next book I DNF'd, also on my Nonfiction November TBR, and actually I don't think, this isn't actually the order in which I DNF'd them. This is just the order I have them stacked in, so I don't really know when these happened throughout the month, but Decoding Andean Mythology by Margarita by Marin-Dale. I was really excited for this, but this is not a beginner's book as far as I'm concerned. I don't think it was meant for people who have no background knowledge in Andean mythology. It's very academic, and it was just really hard to get into because I just felt like I wasn't understanding a whole lot of it. A lot has to do with the languages that were spoken in the past but are now kind of dying out, and that was interesting, but so much of that was used, and because I don't know anything about it, I was very confused. I kept having to like read back in the book and be like, okay, that's what this means, and it was just not going well. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep this one or not. I'm still interested in the topic, I just don't think this is the place to start. I'm actually really disappointed that I DNF'd this one, and that is The Marriage Game by Alison Weir. this was just not good. I love Alison Weir, usually. You'll see I have another book by her later on that I had a much better time with. But this, oh my god, I hated this. I was reading it and it was just making me angrier and angrier the more I continued. This is technically like the second book in a series. The first one I think is like the Lady Elizabeth or something along those lines, and this is about the early years of Queen Elizabeth's reign. And I just didn't like the way she was written. I found that it wasn't so much that I was bored, it was that the way that Alison Weir had Elizabeth characterized just isn't the way I've always thought of her in my mind. I'm not saying she's wrong and I'm right. I'm saying that the voice that I personally have given to Elizabeth is nowhere near the voice that Alison Weir has given her in this book. She portrays her a lot almost like a petulant child. And I just feel like at the age she is supposed to be in this book, I don't think she would be having so many like foot stomping tantrums. And there's just nothing logical about any of the things she's doing. Like, I have seen movies and read books about Elizabeth I where, when it comes to the various marriage negotiations, where she does kind of seem wishy-washy. She was very calculated in the moves that she was making, whereas in this, it just all kind of felt like a child playing a game. She didn't feel like a ruler. And the way she behaved when it came to Robert Dudley really made no sense to me, because anytime like Kat Ashley would question her about her behavior with him, she would basically like stomp her feet and be like, well, I'm the queen and no one can do anything about it. But from experience, she knows that's not true. She has seen so many people very nearly lose their throne. Her own mother was killed because of the whim of a king, because he was so worried about carrying on his dynasty that he killed a woman basically for not giving him a male heir. Like, she knows what a precarious position she is in. Like, her cousin, Lady Jane Grey, tried to usurp the throne over Mary, and yes, it wasn't really her doing it, it was her being used. But she watched her die from that. She watched so many plots to put her on the throne over Mary. She wouldn't name an heir because she was concerned about people replacing her with said heir. So she knows she's in a precarious position. I don't think she would be sitting there throwing this little shit fit and claiming that because she's the queen nobody can do anything to her, because she knows that's not true. Okay, I'm done. I'm done. I'm not going to yell anymore about it. But yes, I hated the characterization in this. I hated it. And that's that. The final book that I DNF'd. It's going to break some people's hearts because this is a pretty recent release, and I have heard at least 3 people say that they loved it and it's one of their top books of the year. And that's Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I'm so sorry. This is just not for me. Aside from like the weird way it's written, in which words, seemingly random words as far as I could tell, are capitalized, and maybe I just didn't get far enough into it, and maybe that does actually have like purpose, but that kind of threw me off. But whatever, I can usually get past this. I was just bored. Like, I was bored, and I didn't care. This is pretty short too, and I couldn't finish it. So that's that. I don't really have any like reason. I was just bored. Now we will get into the proper wrap-up. I'm going to start with the Nonfiction November stuff because that's the fun part of November's wrap-up. I read 6 nonfiction books, 3 were physical, 3 audio, which is a pretty good split there, I think. The first one is the only one, actually, that was on my TBR for Nonfiction November that I finished. Yikes. That is Physics of the Future, How Science Will Shape Human Destiny and Our Daily Lives by the Year 2100 by Michio Kaku. There we go. Now it's not shining so brightly. Okay. This was really good. I had such a good time reading this. What's interesting though is that this is kind of an older book at this point. I think it was published in, let's just look. It was published in 2011. So it's been damn near a decade since this came out. And there are a lot of things that I know that he obviously couldn't have known when writing the book. So some of the things actually are becoming a reality, such as electric vehicles are becoming much more commonplace, although interestingly enough, he barely even talked about Tesla. Like, he had a section about it, but they just had the Roadster at that point. And like, he actually really was envisioning major car companies being the one to be the movers and shakers in the electric vehicle like revolution. So that was kind of funny. He also, when talking about space travel, he mentioned some things that I found frankly absurd, like a space elevator. I was sitting there like thinking about all the things that would have to be lined up perfectly in order for a space elevator to work. And I was like, that's ridiculous. Yet he never mentioned like reusable spaceships like the kind SpaceX is currently making work. So I found that kind of funny because he didn't even mention SpaceX at all. And they're like the one company that people majorly have their eye on when it comes to the future of space travel. So things like that I thought were really interesting. What I really loved was the chapter on the future of medical treatment. I thought it was excellent. It was so fascinating, just the things he was talking about, how he envisions things like a smart home where you have sensors in everything. So they're constantly checking like your body temperature through the sensors in your clothes. They're testing like there's sensors in your toilet, so they're testing like your urine and stuff like that. And all that data just like uploads so you can see it, and if something goes wrong, you can send that information to your doctor, who is now this more or less artificial intelligence, and they can run through it and tell you like what's wrong. It would also alert you ahead of time to, you know, like if they suspect you might have cancer, you would be able to learn early and take care of the problem before it becomes incurable, which I thought was really interesting. I don't know how much of it I actually can see happening, but it was really interesting speculation, and I really enjoyed it. He ends it, the very last chapter is a day in the life in the year 2100, and it was so cool. Just like how he incorporated all his speculation and put it into an actual day, and how that day would go for you if you were living in that time. And I thought that was such a good decision to end the book that way. I really liked this, and I gave it 4 stars. The next book I finished, it was very much a mood read. I was looking at it and I really wanted to read it, and I was feeling guilty because it wasn't on my TBR, but then I decided to check the TBR and do what I wanted. And so I picked up Eleanor of Aquitaine, A Life by Alison Weir. This was phenomenal. It's very hard to find information about females. Even information about women in history from the early 1900s can be difficult to find a lot. So a lot of this was actually her life, but as seen by what her husbands, her sons, her father, whatever, was doing at the time. Which is annoying, but really you have to take what you can get when it comes to information. I was surprised though by how much she did manage to find. A lot of it was she would look at where the money was going, which I thought was really cool that those accounts still exist. And by looking at that, she was able to kind of determine loosely where Eleanor may have been at that particular time. And that was so cool. I think that was so smart to look at you know, where's the money, because Money rules everything, apparently. So yeah, I really liked this. I don't know if I found out a ton of new information. I read earlier this year The Plantagenets by Dan Jones, and a lot of the information in there overlapped with this, but even still, I found this fascinating and such an enjoyable read. It was one of those that I was reading and I was like, oh, I'm just going to read 20 pages before bed, and suddenly I'd read like 50 pages, and I was like, oh my god, it's midnight, I need to go to sleep. So I would highly recommend this Alison Weir book. I think possibly her nonfiction might be better than her fiction. Maybe. But yes, I gave this 4.5 stars, and I was very happy that I finally got to this book. The next book I listened to on audio, and that was The Soul of an Octopus by Montgomery. I've heard this book talked about a lot on BookTube, and I thought I would really enjoy it. Olive says it's one of her like favorite books. I think it was in her like top 10 favorite nonfiction reads. This I just don't think is my type of book. It's kind of memoir-ish, and I was hoping it would have a lot more about the consciousness of an octopus, but what it really was some information about the octopus and a lot of how the people involved around the octopus at this particular aquarium, a lot about how their lives intersected with that of the octopus. And that is just not my type of read, honestly. There was nothing really wrong with this book that I can see. I just didn't really enjoy it that much. So I gave it a 3-star. I'm not even sure if it's totally fair for me to rate a book like this, because objectively speaking, I think it was fine. It was just I didn't care, and I was very bored. So that's that. It's sad, but you can't love everything. Okay, the next book I also listened to on audio, and I was extremely disappointed in it. I'm gonna read you the title, and then we'll talk about why I was so disappointed. So the title is Jungleland, A Mysterious Lost City, a World War II Spy, and a True Story of Deadly Adventure by Christopher S. Stewart. That sounds amazing. Okay? It has so many good elements, it almost feels like a mystery novel. No. The title, it's one of those things where, like, you did not get what you paid for. Essentially, what they're trying to sell this book as is this 30-something guy reads about this man. His name is, I think it's Theodore Morde? I might be wrong on the first name, but I know the last name is Morde. And he reads about his adventures and his discovering this lost city in the Honduran jungles. And after reading about his adventures through the jungle, he decides he wants to follow his trail. And he wants to take the same route and also see if he can discover the city that Morde supposedly found. Now, the World War II spy part, oh my god, it doesn't even come in till the end, because Morde wasn't even a World War II spy until after his whole, like, jungle journey thing. So this whole time I was listening, and I was like, so when does, like, World War II hadn't even happened yet, when he's, like, giving you the beginning of Morde's story for his trip to the jungle. And I was like, so where does the World War II spy come in? Yeah, not till the end. After Morde goes to the jungle, he ends up being recruited to be a spy during World War II. And I was like, okay, so that has nothing to do with the story. So right there, I was really disappointed. Secondly, it was not a deadly adventure so much as a middle-aged man going through a midlife crisis and deciding he's gonna go trek through the jungle even though he's never even, like, been camping. Like, what? And then they get there and he just whines the entire time. All he's doing is whining about the bugs and the mud and how dirty he is and how tired he is and he misses his kid and this, that, and the other. And I was like, and that's why you don't just randomly decide to pack up and go check through a jungle in Honduras with, like, no forethought. Like, his wife, before he left, she was like, why are you even doing this? And, like, that's how I felt after reading the book. Like, why? Why am I doing this to myself? Ridiculous. It was ridiculous. Ugh. I finished it, but only because it was on audio, and so like I would just turn it on while I was cooking or whatever. And I kept hoping, I really kept hoping, that by the time I got to the end, something was going to have happened, but really nothing happened. Like, it just wasn't good. The next book I also listened to on audiobook. It was a very quick one. It's one that I've been wanting to read for quite a while, and that is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. This one I didn't rate because I think I went through it too fast. It's fairly short, so I was just like letting it play on audio, and I think what I need to do to get the most out of it is I need to sit down and I need to read it and I need to ruminate on it. So I didn't rate it for that reason, because I do think I want to read it again, and I want to do it that way, where I sit down and I actually like have a pen and I take notes and I think about what I'm reading and what it means. I initially encountered Man's Search for Meaning several years ago. My brother had asked for some books on philosophy for Christmas. So I just did some research on, good philosophy books, and that one came up, and I bought it for him. And I've been wanting to read it ever since, so I thought, well, now's as good a time as any. So I did. If you haven't heard of this book, which you never know, some people, just miss things. Viktor E. Frankl was imprisoned in, well, actually a couple different concentration camps. He got moved a few times over the course of the war, and he was a psychologist, but I think he was also like a doctor too. He just specialized in psychology. It's kind of difficult to determine because at the time, like, the way psychology was approached was different than kind of how it is now. So anyway, this book is really his story about being in the concentration camps and how a lot of people managed to survive, how he thinks people got through it, hence the title Man's Search for Meaning. And then the final chapter is a lot about logotherapy, I believe is what it's called. It's a form of like psychotherapy that he developed, and I think a lot of it was based on what he learned about the human nature and human psychology from being in the concentration camps. It is an excellent book. It really is. I don't think I got as much out of it as I could have had I approached it in a slower, more thoughtful manner. So I'm going to do that, and then after I do that, maybe I'll rate it, but for now I'm not going to because I just don't think that's fair. The final book I read this month wins for my best read of the month, and that was Word by Word, The Secret Life of Dictionaries by Kory Stamper. This was amazing! I've had this sitting on my shelf for like 4 years, and I don't know what's wrong with me because this is the best nonfiction book I think I've ever read ever. This was so good. Kory Stamper is a lexicographer, I think is how it's pronounced. And what she does is she creates definitions for the dictionary. So there's a lot I don't want to say about this because I think it's going to be so much more enjoyable for everybody watching this to just go pick it up and discover it for yourself. But there is so much information in here that I did not know about dictionaries, and I have a whole new respect for not just dictionaries, but the definitions they contain. Because it's not something you usually think about. Like, somebody has to write those. They're not just, like, spontaneously derived. Like, somebody has to actually go through and think about this and write it down. And then we look at it as though it's gospel, but it's just written by a person. But oh my god, Kory Stamper is hilarious. I cannot tell you how many times I laughed out loud while reading this. And it actually sparked so many discussions between my husband and I about language and about grammar. And it was so funny because now he's making fun of me about a couple of things in this book. One is the word irregardless. And yeah, we've been having a back and forth about that ever since I read this. I 110% recommend this to everybody. I don't know, I can't think of a person who wouldn't like it, quite frankly. So that's Nonfiction November. Now we're gonna roll into the 5 books I read that were fiction this month. The first 2 were from the Royal Diaries series. I have Eleanor Crown Jewel of Aquitaine and Isabel, Jewel of Castilla. These were both really good. I'm actually in the process of rereading the entire series. I read most of it as a kid, but then I realized it's a lot larger than I thought it was. So I'm going through all the ones I own again, and then I've purchased nearly all of them. I'm only missing one. You'll see in my book haul the ones I picked up. These are really good. I really like these. I think I'm going to do an entire video just on this series once I finish it, so I'm not going to talk too much about them. But yeah, I picked this one up because I read the biography on Eleanor of Aquitaine, so I thought this would make a nice little companion, and it did. The next two I read were both by Sarah Waters. I have The Little Stranger and Affinity. Of the two, I think I liked The Little Stranger more than Affinity, but The Little Stranger centers on a house, this grand manor house, and that is a thing that I love in books. Absolutely love it. It's very gothic and dark. This was the first Sarah Waters book I've ever read, and she's my new favorite author. This was so good. So good. I'm not even totally sure how to describe it. Basically, there's this house. It's called Hundreds Hall. And when our main character, Dr. Faraday, is a child, he visits there with his mother. And he's like obsessed with it from that moment on. As an adult, he's now a doctor, and he gets called to come see a sick servant who is at Hundreds Hall. And he kind of ends up ingratiating himself into the family, and then really weird things start happening. It's like a haunted house type of situation. I don't really want to say much more than that, but it was so very good. If you like gothic, I think you'll really like this. And if you like books where it feels like the house is like alive, think like Follow the House of Usher, then I think you should pick this one up. I think you'd really like it. Affinity, I gave 3 stars, mostly just because, like, from what I can tell, Sarah Waters' books start off a little slow and then pick up. My problem with this one was that it picked up, but then it got really slow again for me, and it dragged for a while. The ending, however, blew my mind. This is also kind of a gothic type setting. It's sometime in the 1800s, I think like the 1870s, and there's this woman, and her father has died, and in an effort to kind of pull her out of her melancholy, like, I think he's like a friend of the family. He, I believe, is like the director of this prison, or something along those lines. He asks her if maybe she would like to go be a lady visitor to the women's prison. The idea is that if these women can have a connection with a true lady, it will make them want to be better in their lives, or some nonsense like that. So she agrees to go, and while she's there, she meets this woman called Selena Dawes, and Selena is there, she's a spiritualist, and during one of her, I'm not going to call it a seance, basically she's getting in touch with a spirit. Anyway, somebody dies, somebody gets hurt. And that's how she ended up in prison. Oh, man. So, there's a lot of talk about spirits, spirituality, kind of. And then, this is kind of just like the story of their relationship. Very good. I really, by the time I got to the end, I wasn't quite sure what to think, because that was just not even something I had seen as a possibility for this book. So I really liked this, but because like the pacing just felt so bad for me, I gave it 3 stars. But I still do recommend it, especially if you're into gothic historical lit. I think you'll like this. The last book I finished was The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. I've had this since the beginning of the month, and it took me a while to decide to read it. I was trying to focus on my Nonfiction November selections, and then I just decided to let myself have a book to just enjoy. This was really good. I ended up giving this 5 stars, and I'm not really surprised based on what I've heard about it. what this book is about is it's kind of speculative, I suppose. This woman in the beginning, her life is not at all what she wanted it to be. She decides to commit suicide, and this is like within the first couple chapters, so I don't think it's a spoiler. And she ends up at this place kind of between life and death called the Midnight Library. And in this library, each book that's in there is a different life she could have lived if she had made a different decision at some juncture in her life. This was so well done, and I think Matt Haig really nailed how it feels to regret. And I think he did a really good job at making the various lives she could have led seem believable. I overall just really enjoyed this. I really loved the character growth and the development that happened, and I loved that each new life that she got to, see that she could have had really just felt like a new adventure. I really recommend this book. I know it's been going around on BookTube. I've seen a few channels talk about it, and I haven't seen anybody really criticize it yet. So I'd be interested, if you have read it and didn't like it, let me know why. I would really love to know that. Because as far as I'm concerned, there really wasn't anything to criticize here. So let me know if you've read it, if you didn't like it. I mean, if you read it and you did like it, that's cool. We can like gush about it. But I'd really be curious to know if somebody has read this and didn't like it and why. Then lastly, I just want to discuss 2 books that I started but didn't finish. This is The Warmth of Other Suns, The Epic Story of America's Great Migration by Isabel Wilkerson. I wish I had picked this up earlier in the month. This was on my Nonfiction November TBR, and I was scared because it's massive. I think it's like 600 pages. Close to. This is so good though. A lot of it reads like a novel because Isabel Wilkerson talked to people and she discovered their stories and she wrote their stories down. And then interspersed is just more like factual type information. Not that the stories aren't factual, but I hope you understand what I'm saying. More like statistical information on how this Great Migration progressed and nobody even really took notice of it. So well done. I think she's a brilliant writer. I'm 38 pages in, which is not very far. But I'm just enjoying every page that I read so much, and I don't have any interest in like trying to rush it or anything because it's one of those books that really makes you want to sit and think about what you're reading. And so I'm just allowing myself to do that, but I do wish I had started this earlier in the month. I wish I hadn't been so afraid of just how enormous it is and just dove in because it's really good. I'm sure I'll have more to say about it once I finish it, but just what I've read so far I've been really enjoying. And then, because apparently I can't get enough Sarah Waters, I started The Night Watch. I don't really have much to say about this right now. This takes place directly after World War II, and we're following just 4 different people and kind of what their lives are like now, like after the war, and how things have changed for them and things of that nature. But yeah, like I said, with Sarah Waters, I'm starting to realize that they all start out kind of slow, but there's this, I don't want to call it a magical vibe because it's really not magical, but there's just this sense of like this atmosphere that just keeps you wanting to know more, and it makes you want to like snuggle up with this book and keep reading. So yeah, I'm not very far into this yet, but I'm sure I'm gonna enjoy it just like I did the other ones. Whew! I have been filming for almost an hour, and I sincerely hope that in editing I can cut this down to much shorter. I was very chatty today. So let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these books and what you thought about them. I would love to hear that. If you're interested in reading any of these books, you can also let me know that too, or really just anything else you want to chat about. I like to talk. If you like my content, subscribe. Stick around. I'd love to see you in my comments. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you soon. Bye.